Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. I apologize for the poor sound. Just for the beginning of this video, I am doing a voiceover from a stairwell in the hospital where my dad is still recovering from a stroke. However, in a couple seconds, the sound will get better, so bear with me. I did want to let you know first that registration has opened for the Spellbinders Weekender Retreat. This is in the end of May, but you can watch the content whenever you want. This is one of the most incredible valued products out there. The cost is very low and you get a ton of product with it. And this product is very unique. So I encourage you to check it out. The information is in my YouTube description below. You can get a peek at more of what is included there, and I'm really excited about it. I have a couple of cards that I'll be teaching that are really unique, and I think you might like it. So information is below. Now let's get it going on our cards.
Believe it or not, I have 6 cards to share with you today. The first 3 focus on using the embossing folder and stencils together in creative ways. The next 3 involve the press plates and stencils in creative ways. Then I'll take all 6 of my backgrounds and do a fun card flap design that I think you could use with a lot of different products in your stash. And of course, I have a lot of tips to share with you along the way, and I hope you pick up an idea or two. Let's take a look at the different Spellbinders clubs that I'll be using to create my backgrounds. First, we have the stencil of the month. This includes 5 stencils. The 2 on the left go together and the 3 on the right go together. But keep in mind, you could use just 1 or 2 of these and get a completely different look. Now, while these stencils are beautiful on their own, the nice thing is that they coordinate with other clubs from March 2025. The 2 stencils on the left coordinate with the embossing folder of the month, and the 3 stencils on the right coordinate with the press plate of the month. So you could use these all together and separately in different ways, which really allows for more ways to get creative with these products, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with the 3 blue backgrounds first. These were created with the Better Press Club, or the press plate of the month, and the stencils that I just showed you. I will show you 3 different ways to use the press plate first, and then we will do the stenciling. I think it's best to start with the first background that uses the Better Press plate as it's intended, with the Better Press system. Now, I am the biggest fan of the Better Press system. I think it gives fantastic results, and I think it's a good place to start. So this is the Better Press system over on the right. I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of Spellbinders Cascade cardstock that I'm temporarily adhering to the clear plate that goes on top of the Better Press. I will then take the press plate and put that right at the center of the gray grid surface, which is magnetic, and will hold it in place. Now, you could ink this up with whatever inks you want. You could use the Better Press inks from Spellbinders, but I'm using Hero Arts inks instead. This is one of my favorite of the Hero Arts colors. This is indigo. I find that you really could use a lot of different inks with the press plates. All right, so after I've applied a pretty even application of the indigo ink onto the press plate, I'll put the clear plate on top. It pops on like magnets with the paper facing down. I will then run this through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine, which gives it the pressure to leave a bit of an indentation, but perfect, crisp, inked results. You could not get this with stamping or any other method. This gives flawless, foolproof, crisp results. Look how gorgeous that is, and it took very little time. I absolutely love using my Better Press. So this is a basic way to use a press plate, right? It's what it's intended to be used for. And we will add some coloring to this in a moment using the stencils. But first, let's move on to the second background using this Better Press plate. However, this time I'm not using the Better Press system. Instead, I will use my Glimmer machine. Yes, you can use your press plates on your Glimmer foil machine to get outstanding foiling results. Now, I have my Glimmer machine here warmed up and ready to go, and I also have my Spellbinders Platinum. Now, the cardstock I'm using, I mentioned this before, is the new Spellbinders Cascade cardstock. This is a nice, beautiful blue cardstock. The nice thing about the Spellbinders cardstocks is they're very smooth. Not all color cardstocks are super smooth, but these definitely are, so they're great for foiling. Because the smoother the cardstock, the easier the foiling is to do. So I'm excited to have these new beautiful colors of cardstock that I can foil on, blend on, and much more. I also have a piece of blue Glimmer foil that I'm laying face down onto my press plate. I then will place the piece of Cascade cardstock and the shims that come with the Glimmer machine. I do have an extra cardstock shim in there, that white cardstock piece. That's because I found that I needed just a little bit more pressure when I'm doing big background press plates, but it's not always necessary. I'm pressing the timer button, and once that flashing light stops flashing, I can take the entire platform out and run it through my die cut machine. So the Glimmer machine applies the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure, and you'll get a beautiful foiled result using your press plates. So this is a second way you can use your better press plates. And look at the detail foiling that you get. It's outstanding. Now, please note that although you can use your better press plates on your foiling machine, you cannot use your foil plates on your better press machine. So it's just a one-way thing. The way I like to think about it is that press plates are impressive because you can use them on the better press system and on the Glimmer machine. And I just love this beautiful detail shine. I'll set that aside. We'll add some color with stencils in a little bit, but first we need to do our third background using this Better Press plate from March 2025, and this one is really easy to do. You can use a basic die cut machine and it gives outstanding texture. Now the key to using a Better Press plate in your die cut machine is an embossing mat. Now the embossing mat with the Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine is this gray mat here. Embossing mats are always very flexible, which allows you to make an impression with a die or a press plate onto cardstock. So I'm setting up my Platinum 6, following the instructions that are on the platforms there to make an impression or emboss with the die, but instead I will use my press plate. So you can see I have that gray embossing mat on the top of my sandwich. I have a piece of Cascade cardstock once again, and I'll mist both sides of it with water, just to make sure I get a good impression without tearing my cardstock. I'll lay that onto the flexible embossing mat, then the press plate face down, and then the top of the sandwich that the machine recommends, and I'll run that through. So again, you're following the sandwich of embossing with a die, but instead we're embossing with the press plate. Now check this out. You get this beautiful pillowy-like texture. It is similar to an embossing folder, but I find that it gives a little more detail and gives like a quilted look. I just absolutely love this, and it's one of the best ways to use a press plate. And you don't need anything special. You just need an embossing mat with your die cut machine. In fact, most die cut machines come with the embossing mat. So now this is a beautiful as-is result, but I will be adding the stencil coloring to it. But no, this is a great way to get a simple texture background using any press plate. By the way, this you can also do with foil plates. So now we have 3 backgrounds that we created with the same Better Press plate. The first one we did using the Better Press system. Now this middle one here we just did using our embossing mat and die cut machine. And then the final one was using the foil and the Glimmer machine. 3 different looks, all using the same press plate. Now let's add some color to these using the stencils of the month for March 2025, the Stencil Club. These allow you to add some of that detail and the look of dimension, but you could always leave the backgrounds as is if you prefer. Let's start with our first background, the one that we created using the Better Press system. Remember, I used the Spellbinders Cascade blue cardstock, which is really smooth and great for ink blending, which we're doing over these stencils. I have an all-to-new grip mat on my desk that I'm placing my cardstock on, and then I can place the first stencil down. And I'll press around that stencil edge, and the grip mat will hold that stencil in place. I'm using Hero Art's Dusty Blue ink and also a large Spellbinders blending brush. I really like these large blending brushes because they're super soft, and it allows you to put kind of a lighter amount of ink down first and then build that up if you want to. So you have a bit more control over how much ink you put down than you do with other blending brushes. So let's peel off that stencil and check out the results. You could leave this as is, but I'm going to move on to the next stencil next. And once again, I'll place that on top. It's easy to line up with that Better Press outline that we created. And I'll press the stencil onto the grip mat. I find working on a grip mat is very helpful when you're doing stenciling. However, you could always just tape it to your desk or use a magnet on a magnetic work surface. Now over this stencil, I'm back to that indigo blue color, which is the same ink that I used to ink up my press plate in the Better Press system before. However, I'm not going very heavy with this color. This is one of my favorite blue inks of all time, this indigo color from Hero Arts, and it's nice and bold. However, with this brush, I can again control how much ink I put down. So I'm putting about a medium application of this dark color. I could go a bit lighter if I wanted to. I could go all in and put a lot of ink down and get a really bold color. But again, if you have a good blending brush, you can control the amount and really get more out of one ink pad. Now I could stop after 2 stencils. Once again, I think that's a gorgeous result. I could use like a white gel pen to color in some of the details, but I'll go ahead and do the 3rd stencil. Now over this, I'll use a medium color of blue from Hero Arts. This is an old favorite of mine. This is Cornflower Blue. It's just like a nice middle of the road blue, like a true blue, maybe a little bit lighter than a denim color. This I will again apply over the stencil, and this will give me 3 shades of blue. I use Dusty Blue, Cornflower, and Indigo. So light, medium, and dark. But you could have just used one dark ink pad and gone with a light application, a medium application, then a heavy one, and it would give a similar result. And look at that beautiful detail. Now I could again add even more detail by doing like little bits of white gel pen or maybe a silver gel pen or gems, but I'm going to leave this as is because I have more things to do to this background later in this video. Okay, let's move on to the second background, which is the one that we did the foiling. So we have that nice foil outline, and now we can use the stencils, which easily line up with the foiled outline to add more color. I'm using the same 3 ink pads that I did before, but changing where the different colors go just so I get a slightly different look. This is one of my favorite things to do when I craft, is to make maybe 2, 3, or 4 backgrounds at once and then do the same card design on each of them, just changing up maybe the sentiment or other little elements. That way I have more cards to give when I'm done, and also it gives me more practice. The more you practice with your products, the more creative you'll be, the better you'll use the supplies that you have. And again, you end up with more cards to give. And there you can see that shine. I wish you could really see the outline shine better in the video, but in real life, it is absolutely gorgeous. And I love that blue foil, but if you wanted it to stand out more, you could use a silver foil instead. So remember, you can use your Better Press plates on your Glimmer foil machine, and you can ink blend over foil. All right, for our 3rd background, this is the one where we created lots of texture on the blue cardstock using the Better Press plate and that gray embossing mat. So we just have this pillowy or quilt-like texture that is gorgeous, and we can still use the stencils over that. And it's nice because the stencils kind of pop on over the texture. By the way, I talked a little bit about the Spellbinders' new line of cardstock, the color wheel cardstock, the fact that it's smooth. I also thought I should mention that's heavy weight, so you can use this cardstock for card bases also. And I believe there are 48 beautiful colors, really unique colors, and I look forward to using them a lot in the future because they are smooth, heavy weight, and high quality. I think one of the most important things to know as a crafter is the type of cardstock and quality of cardstock you use is very important. You will always get better stamped results, ink blended results, foiled results, pretty much everything if you're using a high quality cardstock that's meant for whatever you're doing. Usually that is a smoother cardstock and a heavier weight cardstock. So that's why this color wheel cardstock is really impressive to me. All right, so there we have the ink blending on this. You could add some more details, but isn't that outstanding? So I used a Better Press plate with the embossing mat that came with my die cut machine. No special system was necessary to create this particular background. So now I have 3 backgrounds that all are a little bit different using the same Better Press plate. Now I'm going to set these 3 aside and we're going to create 3 more backgrounds. Then we will turn them all into cards at the end. For these 3 next backgrounds, I will be using the embossing folder of the month, along with the other 2 stencils from the stencil of the month set. So I have 3 different techniques to share using these products. Let's get started by just looking at the embossing folder alone so you can see the results that it gives. This is a traditional 2D embossing folder, but I like that it's bigger, so you could do 2 A2 backgrounds at once or a bigger like 5x7 background. I have a piece of Spellbinders Chiffon cardstock. This is like a very light peach. It's beautiful, a nice alternative to like an ivory or cream. I misted both sides with a little bit of water using my Spellbinders mist bottle, and I'm placing it into the embossing folder. You could see I definitely could do a bigger piece of cardstock if I wanted to, even a half sheet of cardstock. Now I will run this through my Spellbinders die cut machine, following the recommended sandwich for using a regular embossing folder. Do keep in mind that the techniques that I share here could be done with a 3D embossing folder also. Now here are the results from this one. I love this pattern so very much, and I'm even more excited there are stencils that coordinate with it. So let's use those stencils. Remember, this time there are only 2 that go with this background. However, because of the design of these stencils, you could easily do selective coloring or selective inking, meaning that you just do different colors in different open areas. However, I'm just going to go with the same color over each stencil. Now, over the first stencil, I'm applying pale tomato ink. I'm going very light-handed on the outside and heavier-handed on the inside. This is one way to give a little bit of interest and variation to one stencil. And the nice thing is the openings of the stencil line up with the raised areas that the embossing folder created. So you're really inking the raised areas only. Now let's come in with the second stencil. This one would be super easy to do in multiple colors, but instead I'll use one color over the whole stencil just to keep everything simple. This time I'm using cotton candy. And the final result is the raised areas that we created with our embossing folder now have the color to it. So there's fun texture to this. I wish you could feel it in real life. So that is the first background. Now let's move on to the second background. This one only uses the embossing folder, but you could add the stenciling if you wanted to. I have my embossing folder open here, and I'm putting a little temporary tape onto the back of another piece of Spellbinders Chiffon cardstock. And I'm placing this into my embossing folder so that it is laying on the side of the embossing folder where the pattern is raised. So you can see how it's positioned right inside of our embossing folder on top of the side where the pattern is raised, not the background, but the pattern. So this is basically the inside of the embossing folder. Now, the other side, which is the inside front of the embossing folder, I will apply some ink. Now, I like to use light colored dye ink, but you could use darker if you prefer. This is the Hero Arts Peony color. I'm applying this ink onto the inside of the embossing folder, and that happens to be where the area that is raised is the background. Then I will put it through my die cut machine as I would a regular embossing folder, and this will put some ink into the background. It'll give you the texture and it'll leave that ink behind in the background. Now, because I put some adhesive in there, that cardstock is staying in the same position, and I will repeat the process, putting more ink into the embossing folder and running it through. Each time more ink is left behind and I'm building up color. Now, I could have just started with a darker color of cardstock, but I really feel the results are best for this when you build up the same color. So you do the process 2 or 3 times with the same color. And then check this out. Notice how the background or the recessed area has the color, and the raised area is that lighter color, the traditional or the original color of the cardstock. So I actually did this process 4 times, and we end up with this beautiful result. This is something that you could do with white pigment ink also, or a darker colored dye ink. Really, the sky is the limit with this, and it works really well with patterned backgrounds like this one. But now we have a darker background, and the raised areas are lighter. Now this piece on the left was the embossing folder alone without the ink in it. So you can see the difference you get. It really makes that pattern pop. Now you could do the stencil over the raised areas too, but I thought I'd leave this background as is and use it in a card in a moment. Now, since that last background was done with only the embossing folder, I thought my third and final background should use only the stencils, and this is a creative way to use them that gives a really unique result. So I have the 2 stencils here and another piece of the chiffon cardstock from Spellbinders. I'm using Spellbinders yellow tape to create a hinge between the cardstock and the stencil. It is really helpful to have this hinge so that you can open the stencil up from the cardstock but not change its position. Now you could use any type of temporary tape for this, but I really like the yellow tape from Spellbinders, and I have put it into a tape dispenser there so I can quickly get pieces of it. Once I have the cardstock and the stencil hinged together, I also need to set up my die cut machine. for the same sandwich I used before when I used a press plate in here. We need that flexible embossing mat, the gray mat that is with your Spellbinders Platinum. So I have it set up with the same sandwich, but this time I have stencil and cardstock that will go through the machine. Now first I will ink up my stencil with the cotton candy ink. I'm inking it up as generous as I can, but don't worry, if you don't do a great job inking it, you can always repeat the process, which I'll probably do. So after I've inked up the stencil, I'm not even going to spritz it with water, I just inked it up. I close that hinge and then lay this down onto the flexible embossing mat. Now you can play around with which way you like best, with the stencil on top or the stencil on the bottom. I ended up doing both. Now I run that through my machine, and what happens is that flexible embossing mat presses the stencil into the cardstock and leaves that ink behind. You can already see the ink that's left behind, but I'll repeat the process to get more ink left behind. Now, if you want a watercolor look, you could first spritz that ink on the stencil with a little bit of water before you fold it up and put it through the machine. But I wanted a really crisp look today, and I love the results. All right, so I repeated that process, and you can see that ink transferring. And what's really unique about this, as opposed to the technique we did with the embossing folder, is that this actually gives like a darker outline to the pattern. So right on the outside edges of all of those openings of the stencil, you get like a darker line on your cardstock. It's really a unique look. So I ended up doing this 3 times, and check out the beautiful results. Such a fun way to do this. You could do multiple colors if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave this as is because I'm really happy with the results. So this is something you could do with a variety of stencils, and you can see the difference between the version on the left and the version on the right. The version on the left is where we inked up the inside of the embossing folder. The version on the right is where we inked up the stencil. And when you ink up the stencil, you get that like darker outline of the pattern. I hope you can see that okay. But that's a great way to stretch your embossing folder and to stretch your stencil. Now I could leave this background as is. I think the results are gorgeous. However, remember there are 2 stencils that work well together. So I thought I'd use the other stencil and put that on top of the background we just created. So I'm kind of lining it up with what I've already done. And over this, I will apply a light amount of that pale tomato ink, going heavier towards the center and lighter towards the edges. You could skip this again and just leave the background simple as is, but I thought I might as well use both of the stencils together, even though I used them in different ways. In fact, you could use those 2 stencils with the technique that I just showed you to get a variety of different looks. But here's what we have with that darker pale tomato towards the center fading out, and the raised areas with that thin outline that we created with the stencil inking technique. So let's look at our 3 peach backgrounds. We have the one on the left that we created by inking the inside of the embossing folder. The one in the middle where we used the embossing folder and stencils as they were intended to be used. And the one on the right where we inked our stencil up and pressed it through our die cut machine. So 3 different looks with the same products, and I think they're really fun and can be used with a lot of other supplies you have on hand. All right, so now we have 6 backgrounds, 3 that we created with the press plates and stencils, and 3 that we created with the embossing folder and stencils. And I'm taking all 6 of these backgrounds and turning them into a card flap design that I really like, but you could use them on a variety of things. You could definitely go for a simple design if you prefer. Okay, so this card flap design is something that's unique because it's not something that you would buy in a store. It's something special that's handmade, where there's a flap that opens up and allows the card to open. Let's get started with this example. Now next we need a card base, and this is a piece of Spellbinders Chiffon cardstock, the same color of cardstock I used for the background techniques. I'm scoring right down the center at 4 1/4 inches and folding it like a hot dog bun. Once I have that folded, I will cut it in half at 5 1/2 inches, and this gives me 2 note cards. I'll need that extra note card in a little bit. I have the first embossing folder and stencil background that I created earlier. I did trim this down a little bit to be slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I will glue that on the top left corner of my folded note card. Notice there's cardstock hanging off on the right and the bottom of my note card. That's okay. I'll just take my trimmer and trim that excess off. So I end up with a note card here that is a little bit smaller than 4¼ by 5½ inches. Next, I have the large die of the month for March 2025, the Large Die Club. This has lots of different dies that allow you to create lots of different things, from a dog to a flower bouquet to an arched piece. Well, I'm using the arched piece to create my card flap. So there are 2 arch dies. One creates a larger arch shape with faux piercing on the inside edge. I use that die to cut from Spellbinders Dahlia cardstock, and I'm putting it into my scoreboard and scoring about 1/4 inch from the flat edge of that arch die cut. So I'm just reinforcing that score line a bit, moving it over just a hair, and then scoring once again. That makes a wider score line that is good when you're wrapping around a card. I will then use my bone folder to reinforce those fold lines, and then I can glue this onto the back of my note card so that it wraps around the front. So I need to attach it right onto the back right side of our note card. So I placed it where I want it, and then I will flip it over and put liquid adhesive just on the back of that little flap that we created on our Dahlia arched piece. Again, this is the bigger arch die that I used for this that creates a little faux piercing edge on the inside. I choose to use liquid adhesive for this. You could also use a strong double-sided tape or anything that you will be sure really secures this onto the back of our note card. I like to put a magnet on top of that or something heavy and give it some time to dry to make sure that it is secure. You could even add a piece of tape on top of it so that it really is secure there. After I'm sure that is dry, I'll flip it over and test it out, and you can see how the flap opens. Then we will cover the back of this with a strong adhesive. Again, I'm using liquid adhesive here, and place it onto a 4¼ by 5½ inch Spellbinders Dahlia cardstock panel. That's just a flat panel, and I'm gluing it to the back of our folded note card. Again, putting something heavy on this while it dries to make sure that everything is secure. That little folded flap that was on the edge of the arch is sandwiched between the note card and that background panel. And so we end up with this fun card flap design. You could do this with like a rectangle flap, but I think this arch one makes it even better. Next up, it's time to come up with what sentiment we'll add to that card flap. Let's start with the sub-sentiment there that says, "Just because I care." That's actually a little Better Press sentiment plate that comes with the bigger press plate that I showed you earlier in this video. That actually has 2 sentiments in it, one that says, "Just because I care," and the other that says, "You're a true friend." So I'm taking the "Just because I care" and placing it onto the magnetic portion of my Better Press system. I have a scrap of the Spellbinders Dahlia cardstock attached to the clear top plate of the Better Press. I'm inking up that little sentiment plate with Hero Art's Cherry Core ink. I will then put the clear top plate on top and run it through my die cut machine. This is just like I did at the beginning of the video with the big background plate. Now, after I've done this, I noticed that that isn't dark enough for me. I want that to be a little bit darker. So I'll just repeat the process. Because the magnetic plate in the Better Press holds that Better Press plate in the same position, that sentiment's in the same position, and my cardstock is adhered to the top plate, nothing has moved. So I can ink it up again and repeat the process. And this will give me a slightly darker impression. And I feel that stands out a little bit better, so I'll use that on my card. The Better Press plate of the month comes with that background, the large background I used earlier, the 2 sentiment press plates, and this coordinating die that cuts those sentiments out. So I use the coordinating die to cut it out, and it fits just perfect. Along with the sub-sentiment, I have created other die cuts that I'll show you in a moment, and we need to assemble those onto that card flap. But first, I want to do another layer on the card flap. There is also a smaller arch die that fits right inside of the bigger one. And I cut that from Wildberry cardstock from Spellbinders, and I'm gluing it right onto the flap. For the main part of my sentiment, I'm using an older die set from Spellbinders called the Fresh Picked Sentiments. I reach for this one often. It has lots of different sentiments in it, and I'm using many of them today, including hi, hello, for you, and thanks. For this particular card, I used for and you. I cut it twice from white cardstock and glued those together for a bit of stacked dimension. And now I'm just using some tape runner to add those to my card. I'm not really sure the positioning just yet, but that little bit of tape runner will help to kind of hold it in place as I figure it out. Now I also have the little sentiment strip that I created with the press plate, and at this point I'm thinking it would go between the words for and you. I end up changing my mind later. I also thought it'd be good to cut a little bit off that flat side of the smaller arch so that it fits a little bit better. And I will use a more secure adhesive, liquid adhesive, to make sure that stays put later on. Now for the for and you, I'm still figuring that out. I want to figure out if that sentiment strip should go in the middle or below it. And this is a process that I do often when I create. I really spend a lot of time getting it just right, but then once I'm happy with it, I can do the other cards in a similar fashion and it'll save me time. I did also want to include a small flower that's included in that Spellbinders large die of the month for March 2025. So you can see I've got that small flower up there, just trying to figure it all out. Now in the end, I decided I liked the for and you very close together on the top left corner of that flap, and then the little sentiment strip would go below it. But since it was a little bit too long to fit next to the bottom of that Y, I cut the sentiment strip in half. So I now have two pieces. One says just because, and one says I care. Now I'm happy with that positioning, so I will remove the for and the U and add liquid adhesive behind it. Again, those for you die cuts are two die cuts stacked together, so it stands out a bit more from the card. It's not too much dimension, but it really makes a big difference in the final result. Now for the small flower, I'm putting a small foam dot on the back of it. I originally was going to use liquid adhesive, but I thought this bit of dimension would be nice because then I'll be able to easily tuck some leaves behind it when I get to that point. First, I want to finish my sentiment. I still have the Just Because I Care sentiment strips. Now you could use thin cardstock strips or scraps behind that to build up dimension, but I had some foam tape little pieces left over, so I thought I'd put those to good use. Now I'm going back to the flower. I didn't really want to introduce a green color cardstock to this. I wanted it somewhat of a monochromatic card. So instead of green cardstock, I cut my leaves from vellum. I thought that would be something soft and not too distracting. If I would have cut these from white, I think it would have interfered with my white sentiment. I could have done gold or a lighter color of peach, but the vellum in the end I think was just the right touch. When in doubt, try vellum. You could leave this as is, but I thought it'd be good to have something hidden under the flap, but you totally could skip it if you wanted to. So I used the smaller of the arch dies and again cut that from Wildberry cardstock. And I'm gluing that right onto the front of our card, that fun texture that we created, and it's hidden behind the card flap. You could add something to this, leave it plain, you could do some flower die cuts, but what I ended up doing is adding my other Better Press sentiment, the one that says, "You're a true friend." And I did that onto Dahlia cardstock, used the coordinating die to cut it out, and I'll add it onto this arch piece. So really, sky is the limit on what you hide underneath there. I tend to keep mine pretty simple so that the recipient knows to go ahead and open up the rest of the card. So let's look at this first completed card. You could add some embellishments to this, but I decided that it had enough going on as is, so much texture, so many different details, and it's such a fun card design, something very different than store-bought. I really like that Better Press sentiment that goes along with the die cut sentiment. And then that touch of vellum just really adds to the softness of the overall card design. The nice thing is this card will still stand up nicely on display, but by adding that fun flap with those arch dies, you are creating something that is very unexpected and unique for your recipient. Now that I've come up with my basic card design and I know what is needed for each card, I have my Spellbinders craft stacks. I have 5 of them here for the other 5 backgrounds. And you can see I've already die cut all the pieces for the card flap, the sentiments, and flowers for all 5. And each of them will be a little bit different. But by prepping it all ahead of time, now all I need to do is to assemble them, kind of following the same process that I just showed you. Here's my second card, which is very similar to the first and how it all came together, but this time instead I used only white cardstock and chiffon cardstock for a soft look. I used gold cardstock on top of the hello that was created using the Spellbinders Fresh Picked Sentiment set. I'm using that on all of my cards. I again used that small flower, but 2 additional flowers created with the large die of the month. I really like the softness that was created by using the soft color cardstocks, vellum, and gold. And although I use the same technique and the same supplies, the 2 cards have different feels to them. Now for the third peach color card, this time I'm doing a little variation where instead of it being a card that opens, it's just a flap that opens to reveal our little sentiment. So this comes together very much like the last one. However, there is no folded note card included. So I have my ink and textured background there on the left-hand side, trimmed down to be slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. It is not glued to a folded note card. I will take my arch piece with that folded flap and just glue that flap directly onto that background. Then I will take this entire piece and glue it onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white panel. So there is no folded note card here. What happens is the recipient opens the flap and it reveals the small area where you can write your personal message. It's just something fun and different to do. Again, unexpected and unique for your recipient. Then I can decorate that flap however I want and leave the area behind that flap empty so I can write my personal message. So really the only difference between this and a card that I just showed you is there's no folded note card on this one. So here is the final card design. There you can see the area where you can write your personal message. On this one, I used the word hi from the Fresh Picked Sentiment die set, did gold cardstock on the last layer, and then I added just because. Now that just because is from the Just Because I Care. I just trimmed it short so I can save the I care for another card. Then, of course, I added the small flower with the vellum leaves. So here are my first 3 cards. They all look a little similar. I could have changed it up even more by doing different colors, but I kept it simple in the process by using the same colors on each. But you can see the sentiments and simple design elements are different. Now let's move on to the blue cards. I did a similar thing for all of them, except for one. I wanted to show you how I did the sentiment. That middle card there has the sentiment thank you. However, the Fresh Picked Sentiment die set from Spellbinders doesn't have the words thank you. It has thanks with the S and you. So I cut thanks and then I used my scissors to cut off the S so that I could team up the word thank with you. So it gave me a different option. Always look for ways that you can give your die cuts haircuts to give a different option that you can use on your cards. So here is the first of my 3 blue cards. On this one, I kept it very simple. I did the thank you sentiment, and then I used the Better Press plate that said, you are truly a friend, but I cut it down so I have only the word friend, and I added some gems around it. Now this is one of the versions where only the flap opens, there's no folded note card behind it, and it really shows off that Better Press background that we created earlier in this video. Here is my next blue card. This one uses the background where I use the Better Press plate with the flexible embossing mat in my die cut machine. On this one, I used the word hello, and I did that from silver matte cardstock. And then I did just because, cutting off the words I care right below it, and then a single flower on top. I left that little arch underneath the flap blank, and later I can stamp a more specific sentiment there when I know who this will be going to. Oftentimes when I make a card, I'll leave the specific part of a sentiment off so that I can add it as needed. Then we have the last card. This is the third and final blue one. This time I did the For You design that I used on my first peach card. I really liked that arrangement, so I just changed it up and did it with the blue version. I really like how the silver matte cardstock goes nicely with that blue foil shine that I have on the background. So there you have it, 6 cards, all with a similar flap card design, but variations, and all of those backgrounds are completely different. I really wanted to demonstrate the different backgrounds you could get using a press plate or an embossing folder along with stencils. It's really fun to stretch your supplies and find new ways to use them, and I hope this inspires you.
I thank you for watching this video. Again, I apologize for the sound at the beginning and end, but I'm hoping it was worthwhile to learn a few things. If you're interested in the supplies that I use, they are linked below my YouTube description. And at the end here, you can check out a few related videos. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.